The photograph came to me through a historical society in rural Minnesota, part of a collection they'd acquired from an estate sale. As a photographic conservator specializing in 19th century images, I'd been hired to restore and catalogue several dozen family photographs, most from the 1870s and 1880s. This particular image immediately caught my attention. It showed a family of 11 people arranged in 2 rows in front of a simple clapboard house. Probably a farmhouse, given the rural setting visible in the background. The photograph was remarkably clear for its age, though it showed typical signs of deterioration. Fading, some surface scratches, a crack across the lower corner. What made it unusual was the notation at the bottom. Someone had scratched into the negative or written on the mounting board. 549. Just those 3 numbers. No names, no date, no location. I began the restoration process, carefully scanning the image at high resolution. The family appeared to be homesteaders or farmers. Their clothing was modest but respectable, typical of rural Minnesota in the late 1870s. An elderly couple sat in the center, surrounded by what appeared to be their adult children and grandchildren. A young girl stood to one side, and through the window of the house, I could make out another figure, possibly a child who'd been inside when the photograph was taken. As I worked on cleaning up the digital image, adjusting contrast and repairing damage, I noticed something odd in the far left corner of the frame. Near the edge of the building, partially cut off by the border of the photograph, was what appeared to be a dog. At first, I thought it was just a dark spot or shadow. But as I enhanced that section of the image, the shape became clearer. It was definitely a dog. A border collie or similar breed, black and white, sitting at attention. And, unlike every other figure in the photograph, who looked at the camera with the typical solemn expressions of the era, this dog appeared to be looking directly at the lens with unusual intensity. No, not at the lens, at something beside or behind the camera. The dog's posture was alert, almost tense, like it had spotted something that concerned it. I made notes about the anomaly and continued with the restoration. But I couldn't stop thinking about that dog, about the way it stared with such focus at something outside the frame. I contacted the Historical Society and asked if they had any provenance information. The director, a woman named Susan Carson, said she'd check the estate records and get back to me. Her call came 2 days later. I found some information about the photograph. It's labeled in the estate inventory as Peterson family, 1877, before the incident. Does that mean anything to you? Before the incident? What incident? I don't know, but I found something else. The numbers at the bottom. 5, 4, 9. They're not just random. They match the number of people who were supposed to be in the photograph versus how many the family claimed were actually there. My skin prickled. I don't understand. The family commissioned the photograph in April 1877. According to the photographer's ledger, which was donated to our collection years ago, he was hired to photograph a family of 9, 2 parents, 5 adult children, and 2 grandchildren. But when the photograph was developed, there were more people in it than that. The photographer's notes say the family insisted there should only be 9 people. But the photograph clearly shows 11. I pulled up the digital file and counted carefully. 11 people, just as she'd said. 2 seated in front, the elderly couple. 9 standing behind them, or sitting on chairs beside them. Who were the extra 2? I asked. That's what I can't figure out. The estate papers don't say, but there's a newspaper article from May 1877 about the Peterson family. Want me to send it? The article arrived in my email an hour later. It was from the Mankato Weekly Register, dated May 12, 1877. Tragedy strikes pioneer family. The Peterson family, well-known homesteaders in Blue Earth County, has suffered a devastating loss. On the evening of May 8th, a fire destroyed their barn and claimed the lives of 2 members of the household. John Peterson, aged 24, eldest son of Anders and Margareta Peterson, and his wife Mary, aged 22. The couple had been working in the barn when a lantern apparently overturned, igniting the structure. Both perished in the flames, despite efforts by family members to rescue them. The Petersons immigrated from Sweden in 1869 and successfully established their farm. They were known for their industry and good character. John Peterson left behind a young daughter, Sarah, aged 4, who was in the house at the time of the fire. Funeral services will be held at the Lutheran Church on Sunday. I stared at the dates. The photograph had been taken in April 1877. The fire had occurred in May 1877. John and Mary Peterson had been alive when the photograph was taken. They should have been in it. But according to the photographer's ledger, the family claimed only 9 people should be in the photograph, not 11. Unless the family was counting after the fire. Unless they were looking at the photograph after John and Mary had died, and were claiming those 2 figures shouldn't be there. I examined the photograph more carefully, trying to determine which 2 people might be John and Mary. The standing figures in the back row were all adults, dressed similarly in the dark, practical clothing of the era. None of them stood out as unusual or different, except when I enhanced the image and examined it closely. I noticed something about 2 of the figures. A man standing in the back row, second from left, and a woman beside him. Their images were very slightly less distinct than everyone else's. Not obviously blurred or out of focus, but as though they'd been photographed through a veil or thin curtain. I'd seen this before in very old photographs, usually caused by movement during the long exposure times required. But everyone else in the photograph was perfectly sharp. Only these 2 showed that subtle lack of clarity. I zoomed in on their faces. The man looked young, strong, with a serious expression. The woman beside him was pretty, with delicate features. They stood close together, the man's hand resting protectively on her shoulder. And when I examined the lighting on their faces, I realized it was different from everyone else. The sun had been coming from the right side of the frame, casting shadows to the left. Every person in the photograph showed consistent shadow patterns, except these 2. The shadows on their faces fell in the opposite direction, as though they'd been lit by a different light source, or as though they hadn't been there when the photograph was taken. I sat back from my computer, my mouth dry. This was impossible. Photographs didn't work like that. Dead people didn't appear in images taken before they died, and if they did, there would be obvious signs of manipulation, double exposure,
cutting and pasting, retouching. This photograph showed no such signs. It was a single exposure, everyone present at the same moment. But the family had insisted there should only be 9 people in it, and 2 people had died a month after it was taken. And those 2 people appeared in the photograph with the wrong shadows and the wrong focus. I looked at the dog again, at the way it stared, with such intensity, at something outside the frame. Dogs were supposed to be sensitive to things humans couldn't perceive. Had the dog seen something? Was that why it looked so alert, so focused? I decided to examine the figure in the window. I'd noticed it earlier, but hadn't paid much attention. It was common for extra family members or servants to appear in the background of old photographs.
But now, I enhanced that section of the image. The figure in the window was a young woman, barely visible through the glass. She stood perfectly still, looking out at the assembled family. And she appeared to be looking directly at the 2 figures with the wrong shadows. The man and woman I suspected were John and Mary Peterson. As if she could see something about them that the camera was struggling to capture. I contacted Susan Carlson again. Can you find out anything about the other people in the photograph? Specifically, who's in the window? She called back within the hour. I found a family letter in the estate papers. It lists the people who were supposed to be in the photograph. The window figure is identified as Katarina, the Swedish girl. She was apparently a hired hand or domestic helper who lived with the family. Is there any information about what happened to her? Let me check. More rustling of papers. Here's something. A census record from 1880. Katarina Lindström, aged 28. Occupation listed as domestic. Residing in Blue Earth County with her parents. But there's a note in the margin. Removed from Peterson household after incident. Returned to family. What incident? The fire? Maybe. Or maybe something else. Wait, there's more. A diary entry from one of the Peterson daughters, dated June 1877. Let me read it to you. Father has sent Katarina away. She became hysterical after the fire, claiming she had seen it coming, that she had tried to warn John and Mary, but they would not listen. Mother thinks her grief has unhinged her mind. But I remember what Katarina said when we had the photograph made in April. She said there were too many people in front of the camera, that some who stood with us were not fully present. We thought she was speaking nonsense. Now I wonder if she saw something we could not. Too many people. Some who were not fully present. Katarina had seen them, John and Mary, appearing in the photograph, even though something about them was wrong. Even though they shouldn't have been there, or perhaps shouldn't have been visible in the way they were. Had they been already marked for death when that photograph was taken? Had whatever was going to kill them in the barn fire been visible to Katarina, if not to the rest of the family? Was that why they appeared in the photograph, with the wrong shadows, the wrong focus, as though they were already beginning to fade? I spent the next week obsessively researching the Peterson family fire. The official cause was listed as accidental, an overturned lantern.
but I found something in a coroner's report that had been filed away and forgotten. The barn doors had been found barred from the outside. John and Mary had been trapped inside when the fire started. It hadn't been an accident. Someone had locked them in and set the fire. The investigation had gone nowhere. No suspects, no arrests. The family had moved on, burying their dead and continuing with their lives. But someone had killed John and Mary Peterson. Someone had trapped them in that barn and burned it down around them. I looked at the photograph again, at all the faces staring at the camera. One of these people, one of the 9 who were supposed to be in the photograph, had murdered John and Mary a month after this image was taken. And the dog had known. The dog had stared at something outside the frame, with that intense, focused expression. Stared at whoever was standing near the photographer. Whoever would later commit murder. I examined every face in the photograph, looking for signs of guilt or malice. They all looked normal, solemn, typical of the era. But one person wasn't looking at the camera like everyone else. The elderly man seated in the center, Anders Peterson, the family patriarch. His eyes were angled slightly to the right, towards something outside the frame. And his expression,
When I examined it closely, held something that looked like worry or fear. I found one more document in the estate papers, a letter from Katarina Lindstrom to one of the Peterson daughters, dated 1905, nearly 30 years after the fire. Dear Charlotte, I was glad to receive your letter after so many years. You ask if I remember that terrible time. I remember everything. I remember the photograph your father insisted on having made, though the expense troubled him. I remember how I saw them, John and Mary, and knew they were marked. I saw it in the way they appeared to my eyes, as though they were already fading, already being pulled away from this world. I tried to tell them, tried to warn them. But how could I explain what I saw? And I remember the dog, old Rex, who was always so gentle. That day when the photograph was made, he would not stop barking at your uncle. He had to be shut in the shed because he kept lunging at him, kept trying to drive him away. Dogs know, I think. They see the evil in men before we do. I am sorry I could not save them. I'm sorry your father sent me away rather than believe what I tried to tell him. But I understand. How could he believe his own brother capable of such wickedness? His brother, Anders Peterson's brother, who must have been one of the adults in the photograph. I looked at the assembled family again, trying to identify which man might have been Anders's brother. There were 3 adult men standing in the back row, besides John Peterson. I found the answer in a property record from 1878. Lars Peterson had purchased his brother Anders's farm in May 1878, a year after the fire. Sold due to family circumstances, the deed noted. Lars Peterson, Anders's younger brother. He'd wanted the farm, and John, Anders's eldest son, would have inherited it. So Lars had murdered John and his wife, making it look like an accident, then pressured his grieving brother to sell. I found Lars in the photograph, standing in the back row on the right side. His face, partially in shadow. He looked like a harder version of his brother Anders, with a thin mouth and cold eyes. And he was the one the dog had been staring at. The one Rex had tried to attack. The dog had known. Katarina had known. And somehow, impossibly, the photograph had shown John and Mary already marked for death. Visible but not fully present. Their shadows falling wrong. Their images blurred, as though they were already beginning to leave the world. I finished the restoration and sent my findings to Susan Carlson. She was quiet for a long time after reading my report. "So the photograph showed the future," she finally said. "It showed John and Mary as they would be, dead within a month." "I don't know what it showed," I said honestly. But something was wrong with their images. Something that Katarina could see, and that the dog could sense. Maybe they were already marked for death. Maybe in some way we don't understand. Their murders had already happened, were already set in motion. And the photograph captured that inevitability. The restored photograph now hangs in the Blue Earth County Historical Society, with a detailed placard explaining the Peterson family tragedy and the anomalies in the image. Visitors come to stare at it, trying to identify John and Mary, trying to see what Katarina saw. And everyone notices the dog. Rex, the border collie who barked and lunged at the murderer, who tried to warn the family of the danger among them. The dog who stares out from the corner of the frame with such intense focus, its eyes fixed on the evil it could sense, but could not stop. The photograph was taken in April 1877. In May, John and Mary Peterson died in a barn fire. In 1878, Lars Peterson bought his brother's farm and prospered. He lived to be 73, dying peacefully in his bed, never charged with the murders he'd committed. But the photograph remains, and in it, John and Mary still stand with their family, their shadows falling wrong, their images blurred. Marked for death, but not yet gone. Still present for that one final moment before everything changed. And the dog still stares, still tries to warn us, still points with its unwavering gaze at the man who would destroy this family. Animals know. They see the evil we miss. They try to warn us. Sometimes, if we're paying attention, we can see it too. In the wrong shadows, in the blurred faces, in the way certain people appear to be fading, even while they're still alive. The photograph shows 9 people, the family insisted. But 11 appear in the image. 2 who would soon be dead. 1 who was a murderer. And a dog who knew everything but couldn't save anyone. They all remain in the photograph, frozen in that April afternoon in 1877. 1 month before the barn fire that would tear this family apart. The dog still stares, still warns, still watches. And if you look carefully, you can see what it saw. The evil standing just outside the frame, waiting for its moment. The photograph has been restored. The faces are clear. The story is known. But the dog's warning came too late. It always does.